A few years ago, Danielle and I went to a theater to watch the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? It was a documentary film about the life and legacy of Fred Rogers, the host and the creator of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And perhaps are anybody familiar with that show? It's kind of a little bit of a big deal. When this documentary first came out, we kind of heard about it, and we were so excited because we, had grown up watching Mr. Rogers, and we knew it was going to be good, but we didn't know it was going to be that good. And a minute in, I'm eating popcorn, and the next thing I know, I'm like ugly crying into my bowl, and I just don't know what it was. I was not prepared for the sort of emotional connection that I would figure out years later as an adult that I had to this show. And, as I thought about that time, I began to think of Mr. Rogers. He did a few very significant things, and a few that made him famous. For one, he transformed the world by how he helped us understand children's programming, by emphasizing things like compassion, creativity, curiosity, and intentional listening. One review said that the most radical thing about him was that his unwavering commitment to the value of kindness in the face of the world that could seem intent on devising new ways to be mean. You'll probably remember this if you grew up watching it, but Mr. Rogers began every episode by walking through his front door, putting on a cardigan sweater, right? Tennis shoes, and singing that familiar line that quickly became synonymous with him. Do you remember how it goes? Won't you be my... You guys are good. All right, nice job. And it's interesting, this question of being a neighbor. What's so interesting about his question to us through that song and through his show wasn't that he was asking if someone was his neighbor, but he was extending an invitation for everyone to be his neighbor. Like, I want you to be my neighbor. Reflecting on this line years later, Rogers said that he always thought of this as an invitation to be close. Now, the truth is that Mr. Rogers embodied a concept that is not new. In those rare interviews where he opened up, he quietly explained that his philosophy of neighborly love, and this is key, flowed out of his faith in Jesus Christ. See, love for neighbor is distinctly a Christian ethic. Love for neighbor is distinctly a Christian ethic. And that's sort of what I want to hone in on today with you, if you'll allow me to, is looking at the idea of neighboring, being a good neighbor. Jane read our passage from Luke chapter 2. I'm just going to follow it up by one more pass here to set us up. One day, an expert in the religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this and you will live." The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Ironically, all this religious leader wanted to know was who he had to be kind to and who he could ignore. He was very intent upon the letter of the law. He wanted to know what the rule was. How far up to the line can I go before it's wrong? And in order to underscore the failure of his thinking, Jesus shared with him the parable, the very famous parable, of the Good Samaritan. Now, if you're familiar with this story, you'll recall that some of the religious Jews overlooked a man in dire need of help, beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. But then we read that the unexpected happens. A vilified Samaritan comes along and acts with extreme compassion towards the beaten man. The Samaritan didn't know this man from Adam. In fact, they were actually cultural enemies. They weren't supposed to be near each other. They would go to great great lengths to go completely around areas where Samaritans lived. But we see that he swiftly met his needs without hesitation, showing that this was his neighbor, in fact. And part of what made Mr. Rogers effective in our time was not only that he forced the public to consider his question, "Who is my neighbor?" which was first answered by Jesus, but that he also steadfastly embodied Jesus' response. And this is what made him a light, opening up doors into communities and into traditions that today seem to be barred shut, even the slightest hint of the gospel. Well, maybe you knew this already, but Fred Rogers was an ordained Presbyterian minister who, instead of being a pastor in a local church, was actually commissioned by the Presbyterian Church in order that he might minister to children and their families through the medium of television. It's fascinating. If you get to watch the documentary, which I hope you will, it goes into that in depth. It's just a fascinating thing. See, this was his mission field: families, children. And it also highlights another key point, that Fred had a value for the local church. I love this part. Not only did he have a value for his actual ministry and the things that he actually was doing, but he actually had such a value for the local church that he worked with his church to have them kind of commission him out like they're going to do with River Valley in a couple weeks. I'm so excited. I hope you'll be there September 8th at Keene State. It's going to be phenomenal. The Presbyterian church that he was part of commissioned Fred Rogers to go out into ministry through the medium of television. And so not only did he have a value for the ministry conduit, but he had a value for his local church. I think that's phenomenal. So I want to take a little bit of our time here to explore how the local church is the most effective vehicle for loving our neighbors well. In fact, I think it might be the best. Let me make a bold statement this morning. It is this statement: without a lived value for the local church, you will not be effective in the mission of God. I'm going to say that again. Without a lived value for the local church, you will not be effective in the mission of God. Like I said, bold statement, but here's why I think it's both true and critical. Because Jesus designed the local church to be his vehicle for effective gospel engagement. The local church is not the idea of man. The local church is the idea of Jesus Christ, one in which he gave his life up for. It is his primary vehicle for making Christians and followers of Jesus effective in the gospel. The local church is Jesus' strategy when it comes to loving our neighbors and reaching a broad range of people with the message of the gospel. Maybe potentially you're thinking today, what is River Valley Church all about? Why are they doing this? Why are we starting a church? Well, again, it's because we believe that Jesus has called the local church to be his kingdom outpost in an area to reach a people. If not, we could just be continually commissioning you who live in this area to simply go out into your workplace and into your families and into your jobs and into the community and just sort of do all the things that Jesus has called you to do. But it's actually one more step. We feel like God is calling us to plant a church in an area, in a geographic location, so that we can continue to be effective over years to come. And so there's an anchor, and Jesus calls that his church. There's a reason that Scripture never describes Christians as some lone range, isolated, and autonomous people. The church and the people in it have been given to one another to live together. And so it describes the local church as many parts of one body, a community of believers joined together for the purpose of achieving something greater, which is effectiveness in the gospel. I want to take the rest of our time to sort of unpack that a little bit and explore this with you. First is that the church is a community of truth. What makes the church distinct? It's a community of truth. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10 says that God has chosen the church to make known his manifold wisdom. What defines Christian community is the truth. A community built on anything else will eventually fall apart. Our culture has reinforced this lesson over and over. And at a time where it's very popular in our day and age and encouraged for people to sort of just live their truth, insinuating that everybody has their own specific version of truth, when in fact truth is sort of a thing in and of itself. Where we're being encouraged to live our truth, the church has been called to hold on to the enduring truth of the Christian faith, some of which we recited this morning through the Apostles' Creed. So, in our context, River Valley Church, we're not a shared hobby. It is so fun to be able to do this with you. And I look around the room and I see some of you and I'm like, I am so excited to be able to do ministry with you guys. Like, we get this moment in history to sort of make our mark on the world through this local church. I'm excited about that. I hope you are too. But I would suggest to you that if we don't keep our focus on the gospel and the mission that Jesus has called us to, all this will become is another insular community that ends up being kind of a hobby horse or a social gathering that is fun but doesn't actually have any power. Does that make sense? Jesus has called the church to be a mission about his gospel, not to turn into another social club like the Rotary Club. I'm not against the Rotary Club, just so you know. My dad is a lifelong Lions Club member, just so you know. And so I'm not against social programs and all that, but I'm just saying that the church is distinctly different than that. And if we're not careful about our focus and our agenda, then we could quickly turn into that. So I just want to kind of make sure we're careful about what we're trying to do. Here's the other thing. The church, we don't get to define the truth, okay? The truth has been defined, and we find it in the person and the work of Jesus Christ. That's who we go back to for the truth. And so in tandem, the central to the church's identity as a community of truth is its imperative to speak the truth in love. In Ephesians chapter 4 spells that out. The danger is doing one over the other. Either we speak the truth without love, or, and this is one of my favorite parts of this idea, is that we try to show the love without the truth. You can't do it that way. You can't have truth without love, and you can't have love without truth. Jesus did a very good job of sort of finding that space. He was able to do both. He embodied the truth. He was the truth, and he showed love. This is why Paul says that it is only when we speak truth in love that the church can, quote, grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. That's what we're trying to do. And so the church is a community of truth. Secondly, the church is an embedded community. The church is an embedded community. The community of truth lives within a specific context, embedded in the local community. The famous Christian missionary Leslie Newbegin said, if the gospel is to challenge the public life of our society, it will only be by movements that begin with the local congregation in which the reality of the new creation is present, known, and experienced, and from which men and women will go into every sector of public life to claim it for Christ, to unmask the illusions which have remained hidden, and to expose all areas of public life to the illumination of the gospel. I love that quote. Do you see what he's saying? He's saying that you, the people of God, will go out of the local church into the public sector and into our families with the gospel power. The local church is a kingdom outpost in a particular place. When we started at Elm City Church, and if you're not familiar with our story, Danielle and I moved here in 2012 to be part of what God was doing. We grew up in New England, Danielle from the seacoast, I from the Upper Valley area, and we went to college right out of high school. We were in Pennsylvania for 10 years. We moved back here in 2012 because we believed God called us to church planting. So we did that. We planted a church called Praxis Church. 6 years in, Praxis Church met up with another church called Elm City Church that was just starting, and we were like, hey, why don't we do this together? And we did. We came together and we formed one new large church and remained under the banner Elm City Church. Now, 6 years later, Elm City Church is ready to send out its first church plant in River Valley, and we're so excited about that. But the idea of being in a geographic location is a big deal. Like Elm City Church is planted in the city proper of Keene. It's right downtown. We love that location. We believe God is going to use that church for years to come to be a sending and an equipping center, to send people out. And we are being sent out by them into this geographic location, in the heart of Walpole, right where we are now, and to the larger River Valley. He's planted us in a specific context, in a specific community. And so the church is an embedded community. If any of these things are neglected, what happens is mission begins to suffer. If we're not embedded, if we're not planted, our mission begins to suffer. For instance, if a church is only concerned about its members and their relationship with God, it can do so at the expense of its neighbors and the neighborhood. And this is often what happens. I hear this story all the time. You see it happening all around you, where churches are dying. There are multiple reasons for that, but many churches, they'll hit the top of what they call the bell curve, and then they come over that bell curve. Some are coming hard over that bell curve right now. And somewhere along the way, it is my conviction that somewhere along the way, that church either lost the gospel or they lost the ability to keep themselves on the mission of God, and they became insular, and so therefore that began their slow death over time. And it could take a while, but it's what happens when we lose focus of the mission that God has called us to. And so the church needs to remain an embedded community to have effectiveness where it lives and to stay on the mission that Jesus has called us to. The church is not just another group, as I said before. It is supposed to be a gospel-translating community. We're the ones that get to translate the goodness of the gospel of Jesus Christ for the world around us. And we're trying to get better at doing that. You know, the gospel is a language all in and of itself. This coming fall, we're going to take a deep dive. Our very first series that we're going to go through, starting on September 15th, our launch Sunday, we're going to take a long, hard look at the gospel. I'm convinced that, and I grew up in the church, we all need to go back to the gospel regularly. What is the gospel? What is the gospel not? What does it mean when we use the word sin? Separation from God. You know, what does it mean that Jesus paid the price on a cross to atone for our sin and to take it upon himself to make us right with God the Father? Sometimes we get parts of that, you know, and even me, it's like if we're not rehearsing the gospel regularly and exegeting the gospel in our own life, it's really hard to remember that sometimes. Like, what is the story? Oh yeah, it's kind of, I remember it's this and that. I want us to look at the gospel really for the next, probably 8 to 10 weeks when we first start out and just really take a good hard look at it. But when we lose the gospel, we lose our effectiveness. We lose our sense of mission and we begin the slow death. And we don't want to do that. We want to remain alive and vibrant and we want to affect generations. And finally, the church is a community of hope. The church is a community of hope. It's supposed to be a community of hope. You know, maybe it's not seen like that in the public's eye, especially in this moment where it's very heated, theologically and spiritually and politically and all these things. You know, the church is called to be a community of hope. It's called to boldly proclaim the glorious hope that Jesus' good news offers, not just to us, but to the world around us. And so, we live in these times of intensity, immense change happening in our society, both technologically, politically. And how we navigate this change together will show the mark of our hope. Especially, as we specifically begin to go into a political season, for instance. How we navigate the complexities of a divided political, world will be a testimony to the world around us from the church of how we deal with these things. How we conduct our speech, how we talk online, on social media. Believe me, I can get caught up just like anybody else in that if I'm not careful. But people are watching us. People are looking. They're looking in. What does the church have to offer that's different than what I see and hear right now from the non-church? We have an opportunity to be a community of hope. And when things look really dire, guess who sees the hope in the world? Guess who gets to show the hope to the world around us? The church. The local church. That's why we bear with one another, we serve one another, we pour into one another. This is the hope that we should have, and it should define how we see and engage the world around us. And somehow, as we live into the hope that we have through Jesus Christ, the world sees our example and should be drawn to the gospel. That's what we believe. We have nothing more than the gospel message to give as hope to the world. So what I want to do now is just switch gears really quickly and sort of follow up here by moving us from a theoretical about the church into the practical. One of the geniuses of Mr. Rogers, I think, is that he moved people. He took the passivity of the noun neighbor, and that often leads to inaction, and directed us and you, hopefully, to see that it's an action noun, or an action is a verb. Neighboring is the way that we should look at this idea, this concept of going from, won't you be my neighbor, to let me show you how to be a good neighbor. Like, let me neighbor. The move from simply being a neighbor to really neighboring begins with intentionally serving others, welcoming them into our lives, engaging them into our lives. And so the question here is, how can our church, River Valley Church, how can we begin to neighbor well? How can we do this? Well, there's many ways. But the first one I would suggest is that we should know who our neighbors are. That's the first one. Some years back, we did a little exercise, we'll probably do it here at some point, where we had everybody map their neighborhood. And I get it, as we live in more rural areas spread out, you're like, well, my neighbor lives like a mile down the road, But you should know that neighbor's name. And you should make an attempt to know who your neighbors are. We did this in my neighborhood in Keene. We went and made sure we knew every neighbor's name within just kind of like a block of each other, kind of thing. And so we sort of had everybody on a grid, and we knew where they were and listed their name for the purpose of being able to pray for them as we would walk our neighborhood from time to time and just sort of get into each other's lives as we could. But there is no better place to serve as a missionary of grace than with the people who live next door or down the street or in our towns. It starts with this period of discovery. Who are these people? Who lives there, Where are we positioned to be a good neighbor? And where you are located, wherever you live, is not by accident. You need to know that. Like, where you live is not by accident. God has you there for a reason, and he's going to call you to be a good neighbor. Listen to this, Acts chapter 17. I love this passage. It says, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. God is not far from anyone. And he makes himself known to the world through you, through his people. And this theological truth has dramatic significance to how you and I live in our communities. Just this past Friday night, some of you in here, we got some of our guys together, and we went up to Watkins Tavern, Inn and Tavern up on the hill by Hooper Golf Course. And it was awesome to just sort of embed ourselves in the community that's already happening around us. Really neat to just sort of rub shoulders, get to know one another. But we foresee doing a lot more of that. And the sky's the limit. There are so many things that happen in this area with a local focus that really behoove us as a church and a community to partner and get involved with. There are really good things that we can do. There are some things that we won't do, and then there are some things that we will do on behalf of the gospel that help to embed us into the community that we live. We're here for a reason. And so it takes intentionality to know your neighbors, but this is the first step towards neighboring, not just being someone's neighbor, but neighboring. The second thing we do is we can list our connections. As I mentioned before, when we move from mission from a theoretical concept to a practical one, we can begin to list out, as we might have done, connections with the people that we have. Start making a list. Some of you have done an ecos list. That's something our church has been really big on, is creating a list of your network of people in your family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers, sort of in that, 12 to kind of 15 range of people that are just naturally in your life already. Making a list of those people and keeping them in prayer, looking for opportunities to engage them with the gospel. So I want to continue to ask you to do that, to look at those lists and to make new ones and say, these are the people in my life. These are the people I'm going to pray for. I can't reach everybody, but God can use me to reach somebody. And so that's what we want to pray into. And so keep that list in front of you, put that on your fridge, keep it by your bed, wherever you can, to engage with this list of people that God's already put in your path. And then finally, we can engage the community. Think about the community or the neighborhood our church is in. Isn't it awesome that God has planted us right here in downtown? I just love that. It's similar in the sense that Elm City is in the downtown of Keene, more of a city, and he is called River Valley to be in the downtown of a more rural area. But we're both in the downtown. We're both in the heart of the place that we're in. And I love that. I love to be out. I love to see people walking by. As my time sort of escalates up a little bit, I'm out this way more. Just this past week, we were doing a tech install here. Doors are open. People are walking by. We're having conversations. I just love being engaged in the community, and I think there's more of that to come. Some of you participated, a couple weeks ago. We handed out free cotton candy at the Savings Bank of Walpole Community Picnic. A few of us got together and put some cotton candy together and handed it out for free, and it was just really nice to be involved in the ongoings of the community events that happen even before we were here. So it's kind of nice. We feel like we're being welcomed as neighbors, and we're trying to be good neighbors at the same time. But what are the unique needs around us? I want to encourage you and I want to challenge you to start thinking about that. What are the unique needs around us as we look around, as you look through the places that you live and work? Where are the areas that we can meet needs? How can we collectively bring our church together to meet specific needs? I'm thinking about this coming Advent season, as people may be struggling, and needing extra assistance. How can we begin to spread out our reach together as a church to be effective? Not only to meet a physical need, but also a spiritual one. And then finally, we can look at things like, I was thinking this past week, the school system. There's opportunities for elderly care. There's people in this neighborhood even that are older and might be needing assistance in lawn care or whatever it may be. There are all kinds of ways that we can begin to ask questions. Our local businesses that are represented in Walpole. How can we begin to take the talent that we have and the people that we're working with and begin to think, how can I use what God has given me to bless my neighbor, to bless someone else near me? So we can know who our neighbors are, we can list our connections, and I encourage you to do that, and we can engage the community. And so the key to effectiveness of these tools is faithfulness to the task out of the proper motivation. If you were here a couple weeks ago, I talked about the motivation of a Christian and how we do what we do not because we're compelled to do anything out of legalism or guilt, but because Jesus has done everything for us. He has shown us grace, and so we then, in turn, show grace to one another. And so the only way that we will be faithful is when we are motivated by the fact that Jesus is already faithful on our behalf. Jesus is more faithful than we ever will be. Jesus lived as an exiled missionary, an ambassador, and labored for your soul so that you could joyfully join him in his mission for the world and for this community. So my encouragement is for all of us, wherever we are, to get out there, to embrace our calling and to love our neighbors.